hands down, one of the top 2 areas of risk that I see in most businesses, especially on the smaller side, is that lack of management depth or the lack of the leadership team that has already been developed. And again, that takes time. Depending upon the industry, most of your key people probably grew up in the company. Let's say it's a manufacturing or construction company, and they've kind of grown from, maybe a traditional, skilled labor to a division lead to a project manager, and now they're, keep growing in their role. They've not had formal management training, let alone leadership development training. They know the business, they know the customers, they're very knowledgeable, but they just need a little bit of guidance on what it takes to be a leader. And so, again, that takes time, and you want to make sure that you give yourself time.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman.
All right, welcome back to How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully podcast. My name is Jake Wayman. My wife and I are the proud owners of Orange Theory Fitness here in Wichita, and also serve as a fractional business development executive, helping organizations drive their top-line revenue. Best part of my life right now, I actually took my kids to the trampoline park, Aviate, over the weekend, and my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old had a ball. I mean, and my 4-year-old actually went off, there's this slide that you slide off and you fly in the air, and then I did a backflip, so he wanted to try it. Didn't work out for him, but at least tried it and attempted it. So my kids they're going to be just as crazy as I was, and we're going to have a broken bone here soon, but we haven't had one yet, but I'm enjoying watching my kids grow up and having fun with them. So, but yeah, I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Sam Foreman. Sam, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Sam Foreman. I'm the founder of Foreman Law. Our firm works with a lot of folks who are buying, selling, or growing businesses that help create thriving local communities. And one of the best parts of my life right now is I also took my kids to Aviate this weekend.
What day were you on there?
We were there on Sunday.
What time did you go?
Oh, goodness. 3 o'clock.
We literally just left.
Oh my gosh.
That's hilarious.
There was a huge volleyball tournament
there.
Yeah.
We literally just missed each other.
Were you one of the people that was parked in the grass or
no,
illegally
it was not
parked
me.
No. It was nuts. Yeah. But to all of our listeners that have small children or grandchildren, highly recommend a trampoline park.
Yeah.
We like to go there and get the wiggles out. My 7-year-old loves that slide that you're talking about. Man, that's awesome. We had to leave early because we're mid potty training cycle with our 3-year-old.
Yeah.
So, which is also one of the best parts of my life right now. So,
we have not started that process with our 2-year-old yet. I know it's needing to come here soon.
Even though this sounds like the beginning of a parenting podcast, we're actually here to talk about how to buy and sell businesses successfully. We promise.
Building a business is like raising a kid. So
yes, it is. And there's so many parallels for potty training. They're in there. But we are joined by Stephanie Carlin, and she's done a lot of excellent work in the valuation space and the consulting space with her business, C5 Advisors. Stephanie, thank you for making the trek down here to join us in the studio live. We really appreciate that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, and what's one of the best things going on in your life right now?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, one of the best things that's going on in my life right now, talking about kids, is I'm in a little bit more advanced stage of life than y'all are. And I have an 18-year-old who's going to graduate here in a couple of months.
Oh,
and
congrats.
So that's super cool that we have a graduating senior. He's going to go to K-State, major in business. And so it's really fun to be able to actually talk about things that I do for a living with him because he's interested in it. And so
that's cool.
really excited about where life is going to take him. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember Stephanie actually brought him to
That's
a lunch and learn that I put on with Infinity Capital Partners, and just really cool that she was able to bring him to that. And he was locked in the entire time, and it was just really cool to see that. I wish when I was younger, I kind of had that, like, hey, I want to go learn and everything too. I was like all about girls and sports and everything too when I was in high school.
Well, and he remembered that. So we were in Wichita last weekend. We had a fun family day, went shopping, and then went to our very first hockey game that night.
Okay.
But we were driving down that part of town, and Cooper said, "Hey, Mom, that's where we met with those investment bankers."
Yeah.
And I said, "That's right, you
That's cool.
remember." And
That's
so,
cool.
yeah,
Love it.
that made a lasting impression on him for sure.
Awesome. Well, something that Sam and I talk a lot on this podcast is about transitioning value, when it comes to a transaction. And a lot of things people think about, the numbers on a spreadsheet, which does matter, but a lot of its more value is much bigger than that. So, I mean, when many business owners think of business valuation strictly in terms of financials, what's the spreadsheet, what's EBITDA, what does that look like? But how do you help them understand, that true value goes beyond the numbers? What does that really look like when you're working with your clients when they're thinking about a transition?
Yeah, I love doing what I do. I've been doing it for 25 years and helping business owners understand the value of their business. But like you said, it goes so much further than just the numbers. And so what I try to do through C5 Business Advisors is help them understand that, to sum it up, it's people, it's profits, it's both. And so although it's important to focus on profitability and revenue and EBITDA and the balance sheet and debt levels and all of those things, don't lose sight of the other aspects of value, which are things such as culture, your workforce. It is your customers. It's your geographic location. It's basically the blue sky of a business that most business owners have heard that term, blue sky, but they don't really know how to transition that to value. And that is usually a big piece of value, is all of those intangible things that aren't as easily to identify in terms of how to put a value on them, but definitely play a huge part in determining the worth of a business.
Now, is blue sky and goodwill, are those the same thing? Or?
Generally speaking, I mean, we could get super technical in terms of accounting, talk, but yes, for our purposes today, blue sky, goodwill, it's all kind of, we're just going to lump that into one category today.
When we were buying Orange Theory, like that was our account was kind of like, how do we put a number on what blue sky or goodwill is in there? Like, what is that? And trying to really pull that point out to say what it is. And so, fascinating.
Well, and Orange Theory has, definitely name recognition. So that's part of the blue sky.
Yeah.
And people like yourself and your wife were willing to pay for that name recognition.
Yeah.
The other part of value is really in the saying that value is in the eye of the beholder. And, I heard on a podcast that I was listening to that you guys have done previously that, no parent is going to, call their own baby ugly, right? And the same kind of goes true, is said to be true for businesses. I mean, there's owners that recognize some areas of improvement, but they're not looking at their business from the same perspective as a buyer. Alternatively, you could have a buyer that is emotionally driven, whether it's industry, whether it's the idea of buying a business, whether it's the geographic location, whatever the case might be, their perspective might value that particular business higher than another buyer that doesn't have those emotional influences. So value really does encompass a lot of things that definitely go beyond the numbers.
Well, and when you go through an SBA route, hopefully what you put on that purchase price or purchase agreement hopefully matches up with the valuation the SBA comes back with too. So
well, and if it doesn't, you just have to make sure that you've got enough cash at the table to bridge the gap.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
they're loaning on asset value for sure.
Yeah. No, that's great. How do you help folks start to think about what that value is before they get to the deal table? Or are most folks talking to you when they're ready to, really have that sale process?
I wish business owners would take more of a proactive approach to understanding the value of their business. Usually it's the largest asset in their portfolio. And most of the time they've only owned one business. but yet they don't really fully understand what the value of that business is worth. They might hear what I'll call locker room talk in terms of, what the industry pricing multiples are, or the buddy sold a business for an X times multiple. But they've never taken the time to actually understand what the value of their specific business is from an independent appraiser's point of view. And that's where I come into play. And so when a business owner contacts me, that's kind of the start of the conversation. I use valuation as the springboard to get us to other conversations. Do you know what the business is worth? And oftentimes they'll say, I have no idea. Or they'll throw out a number and I'll say, okay, how did you come up with that? Well, my industry sells for 1 times revenue.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, tell me more. And so anyway, it really does help to help guide them to looking at their business from, again, a different perspective, understanding what drives value, how they can increase value, and then help them formulate a plan to move forward.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about a lot is around that exit planning process, and so when it comes to when you're working with somebody on a transition, an exit, or, preparing them for a sale, what are the biggest misconceptions business owners have about selling or transitioning their company?
Yeah. I think, generally speaking, they grossly underestimate the process. They think that it's very similar to selling a house. They're going to list it.
It's not.
And we might all be a little bit less
4
busy.
bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,400 square feet.
I have 400 pieces of equipment, 220 employees.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it was only that easy, but it's not. Not only is it's called a process for a reason, but even getting the business ready to sell. So if I could use the house analogy, if we're getting ready to sell our house, we're not going to just wake up today and say, let's put a for sale sign in the yard. We're going to talk to our spouse, talk to our kids.
Yeah.
We're going to maybe get the carpets cleaned, maybe put some touch-up paint, maybe, finally, fix that hole in the wall. We're going to do what we can to get the house ready for sale to help drive value.
Yeah.
Well, on a much more complicated scale, that's what business owners need to do too if they're going to sell their company. And therefore, they need to make sure that they give themselves time to do that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that business owners underestimate the amount of time it takes to prepare their business for sale, but also to prepare themselves for that emotional roller coaster ride, to get them mentally ready, emotionally ready, to let go of some control or all of control. And begin that transition process.
What type of time frame do you like when you're talking to them and that conversation's happening and you're like, okay, you need to, it's going to take this long to like prepare the house or what, it would kind of go that analogy. But then also once you start that process to actually market your business, what do you tell them? Is it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? Like what's kind of that ballpark that you think they should anticipate that time's going to take?
I would hands down say, please give us at least 3 years.
Okay.
Because you have to go through and get an initial indication of value to make sure that your value expectations align with what the business is actually worth from an independent person's perspective. You also need time to maybe address ways in which to drive value. And as you guys know, buyers want to look at a minimum of 3 years financial information, right?
Yep.
And so if you're getting in there to kind of make some improvements, they're going to want to see a little bit of a track record.
Yep.
And so if you can give yourself at least 3 months, I love it when business owners come to me 5, even 10 years before they want to do something, because if they understand that, wow, we could increase value, it's like, why would we wait?
Right.
Why wait to sell? Let me capitalize on that for a few years.
Right.
Yeah.
And then get the systems going and then be able to sell it for a higher multiple.
Yeah.
So my advice is give yourself some time to get the business ready, but also get the owner, again, emotionally and mentally ready.
Right. Well, and I like I think the comparison to selling a home is useful in another way that when it's your house, you kind of get used to everything.
Yeah.
Right. And you get used to, maybe that part of the house that leans a little bit. Trying to think of an innocuous example that wouldn't be painfully obvious to everyone.
That little hole in the rug or something.
Right. Yeah. You forget some of this stuff. You just get used to it. And a buyer's not going to come in and look at it that way. And, in a house, some of that stuff's real easy and real quick to fix, and it's relatively low cost. But when it's in a business, that's where I think the time is so valuable, and the insight is so valuable, is that if you're trying to change the value that you can exchange with a buyer in a deal, you have to think about that value. Like one of the ones we talk about a lot is, or not necessarily a lot. Let's give ourselves credit for it. We talk about this so much, people are tired of hearing about it. But one of the things we talk about often is having a transferable team.
Yeah.
Like a team in place. And I mean, when you've worked with folks that come to you and they don't have a transferable team, is that, how does that impact value?
Yeah. So I would say hands down, one of the top two areas of risk that I see in most businesses, especially on the smaller side, is that lack of management depth or the lack of the leadership team that has already been developed.
Yeah.
And again, that takes time. Depending upon the industry, most of your key people probably grew up in the company. Let's say it's a manufacturing or construction company, and they've kind of grown from, maybe a traditional, skilled labor to a division lead to a project manager, and now they're, keep growing in their role. They've not had formal management training, let alone leadership development training. They know the business, they know the customers, they're very knowledgeable, but they just need a little bit of guidance on what it takes to be a leader. And so, again, that takes time, and you want to make sure that you give yourself time. And also, I would say it would be unfair to transition a business and just kind of hand it over to, I'll call it the next generation, family or not, not family, without proper training and without proper guidance. I think business owners, primarily founders, sometimes forget that they've had 30, 40 years to figure this out because they started the company. It's a construction company, and they started with a ladder and a hammer and their pickup truck 40 years ago, and now it's a multi-million-dollar company. They forget that they've had decades of training. And they've grown with the business, but their key employees haven't really had to figure things out the way that they did. They don't intuitively have that entrepreneurial spirit or that risk tolerance that so many entrepreneurs have, and they need to be taught that. So
our couple guests actually even today were actually talking about, like, when was the last time you took a vacation, talking to the business owner,
right?
Because like that is a big indication of, like, can you remove yourself and the business still function without you? Because if it can't, then that business is not ready to transact, because it's dependent on you. You are the keeper of everything, and you need to start thinking about, as you're saying, like the 3-year process or even 5 years at some points, to say, okay, what do I need to remove myself from in order for this business to go on without me, if that's what I'm planning on doing.
And not only is that a good exercise for the business and for that next generation of leaders to kind of test the waters, I'll tell you, it's just as much of an exercise for that owner. I've had so many clients where I've tried to encourage them to take Fridays off. Just start by taking Fridays off.
Yeah.
Let alone a 2-month sabbatical. Just take Fridays off. They can't do it.
Yeah.
What am I going to do with my time? I don't know. My wife doesn't want me, around the house all day. I don't have any hobbies. And it's like, okay, this is again understanding that, are you really ready?
Yeah.
It might sound good to kind of be able to have more freedom, to not deal with some of the, people issues, the day-to-day fires that come up, but you might not be emotionally ready. And so it does take time, again, to develop new hobbies, to develop new interests. Maybe you want to pursue buying another business or, starting another business, but you've got to think those things through. So that trial run of, whether you call it a sabbatical or just reduced time, is really important for everybody involved.
Well, when you're kind of talking with business owners, what are some overlooked factors that can significantly increase or decrease the value of a business as you're looking at them and over the clients you've worked with? What are some of those overlooked factors?
Sure. Again, I think it kind of pertains to maybe some more of those intangible things that, it's really easy to focus on financials, drive revenue, drive profitability, improve, efficiency. But it is things like making sure that you have a strong company culture, a strong management team. It is documenting processes. If I could say one thing, it's like, okay, please, as tedious as it is, take the time to document your processes.
Yeah.
Because to your point, most owners, founders especially, they have all of the head knowledge.
Yeah.
And they haven't properly communicated everything to the right people in their company.
Yeah.
And I find it, and again, it's fun for me because I, as a client told me just the other day, you get to help business owners work on their business. We've all heard working on versus working in.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, and I love it. They're the ones that actually have to implement it, though.
Yeah,
So it's hard.
Yeah.
I get the fun part. They get the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if they can take that time to document processes, that is going to help to drive the value. And then, of course, there's other intangible things too, understanding the value of your intellectual property and if you have it. But I think the two biggest issues are making sure you have good leadership team, management depth, and those process documented.
Yeah, Sam said this earlier. It's have an SOP for the SOP.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think even like talking about financials, like financials gets the buyer to the table, but it's the due diligence of what you're talking about, these intangibles that they're going to uncover, and it may actually kill the deal because there's something that comes up from a culture standpoint or from, there something wasn't disclosed or what have you. And it's like, financials are only a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
It's a big piece because that's actually showing like, hey, what is the financial worth of it from a number standpoint, but then the people side of it is really what actually probably end up closing the deal or killing the deal at the same time. So,
any of us could walk into a store or a restaurant and be greeted by one of their employees, and you can immediately tell if that place has a good vibe, a good culture. If the employees are happy and you're greeted well and you have good customer service, chances are that company has pretty good culture.
Yeah.
Alternatively, if nobody pays attention and you're dismissed and the service is terrible, it's like, well, why? And it usually can lead back to just poor culture and poor management.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of times businesses that will appear successful that have bad cultures are sometimes being held together by a really strong personality.
Yeah.
And when you're a buyer and you're looking at that kind of thing and you realize that, hey, this culture isn't something that can sustain itself in this particular direction towards these particular metrics without this outside force, and that might be the founder and their personality, et cetera, or their vision, and you're going to buy a business and take that person out of the equation now, I mean, you've got to understand how that fits into the creation of value from that business and whether or not it's worth it from that perspective. Because it seems like a lot of times culture is that force multiplier. It takes all of the inputs that you have and really determines what kind of return they're actually going to create for folks.
Absolutely. And if you have a strong culture, then that means that your people are less reliant on that key person. And key person is a real risk. And the more risk a company has, the lower the value. So that's part of understanding the valuation process and what we do, and come in and look at the business from all different perspectives. We identify those risk factors, which then, if given enough time, you can turn those into value drivers and increase risk. If you don't address them, it's going to lower value.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's good stuff. When you think about the difference that addressing some of those things can have in terms of changing the value of a company, can you give our listeners some examples of, hey, here's what somebody did that obviously without sharing any confidential information, but here's what somebody did and what kind of impact it had on their business and their valuation.
Yeah. So one of the stories that I tell often, and I won't name them by name, but they know they're one of my favorite customers, favorite clients, is a company that had significant customer concentration. Truth be told, the owner came to me at age 42, just burnt out. He's like, I'm burnt out, I'm tired, I'm ready to sell. And we enlisted the services of an investment banking firm to try to sell this business. And long story short, we couldn't get it sold for two reasons. One was geographic location, and the other, probably more importantly, was lack of customer diversification. Two customers represented about 80% of their revenue. Now they were been customers for 30 years,
Yeah.
but still there was that customer concentration. So
Yeah.
the owner wasn't concerned. He knew
Yeah.
that those
Yeah.
were going to be around forever, but a
Yeah.
buyer is like, no,
Yeah.
that's too much risk for me. So we went back and we said, okay, how can we diversify? Well, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. And so he wasn't going to not do work for his key customers. So his vision was, let's diversify through acquisition. So he started acquiring complementary companies, not in the same exact space, but in this, general industry.
Yeah.
And it made several acquisitions over a relatively short period of time. And that in and of itself was enough to help diversify his company and actually strengthen it so much. It went from a company of about 14 people, and here we are 10 years later, and they're at about 140 people.
Wow.
They have 7 different wholly owned subsidiaries,
Yeah.
most of which were through acquisition.
Yeah.
And the company has grown substantially.
And does he still own it? Is he still in it?
So that's it. That
Yeah.
might parlay into another one of your questions. Is actually he ended up selling it to an ESOP.
Okay. Jake and Sam here.
Thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. Really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star. It's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me.
Well, and yeah, so it is parlaying into one of our questions. So, what are like ESOPs? So people that aren't familiar, it's an employee stock ownership plan.
Yep.
And you're very involved with these. You've helped a lot of companies transition them. Kind of talk through like, what are the key benefits and challenges to an ESOP, and what are people looking at? Like, first, explain what ESOP is so people kind of have an idea from our listeners, but then what are the benefits and challenges you see with those?
Yeah, so I love talking about ESOPs, and I was telling, Sam and Jake before we started that I'd like to come back and do a whole hour on ESOPs because I'm just it's so fun. It's not for everybody, but it's a really fun topic to talk about. So as you mentioned, ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, and what it is, it's a exit planning, tool or technique that the sellers can actually sell the company to an ESOP, whereby their employees get to benefit from indirect ownership of company stock. So without getting too technical, an ESOP is a trust that owns the company. The company, if it's 100% owned by an ESOP, the ESOP is the sole shareholder. It's a trust, and all of the employees that meet certain qualifications are beneficiaries of that trust. And every year, they're allocated shares of the company that they work for. And so then they get to participate in the value growth of the very company that they've been a part of. Similar to a 401k, there's usually vesting schedules that are attached to it. But it is a great way to reward the employees that helped you grow the company. It's a great way to preserve the culture that you've created. It's a way for owners to leave a legacy, not only to their employees and to their customers, but also to their community. Here in Kansas, I see a lot of companies that are in small rural communities. And yes, they could sell to private equity, or yes, they could sell to a strategic, knowing full well that the buyer will probably just uproot that company and move it somewhere else. And then all of those employees would likely not have a place to work, or would have to end up commuting, or figure something else out. So an ESOP is a way to preserve all of that. And through the ESOP, that wealth is then distributed, again, to the employees who participate in the ESOP. So that's a huge kind of intangible benefit to an ESOP transition. A real tangible benefit is the tax advantages of selling to an ESOP. And I'll just give 2 quick examples. The first we don't see as often right now, but for companies that have, or for owners that have significant capital gains exposure from a business where they have very low basis in, they could elect what's called a 1042 and defer their capital gains tax as a C corporation who sold to an ESOP. What's more popular is if you're an S corporation, and I'll use the example of 100% S corp ESOP. You basically avoid federal and state income taxes altogether. So if you think about owners who have an interest in an S corporation, the company will make distributions at a minimum for you to cover your tax liability. And then usually there's distributions on top of that to get the return on the investment. Well, the ESOP trust is a tax-exempt entity, and so there's no need for tax distributions. So that cash is retained in the company, which in the after the initial transaction is often used to fund the transaction, fund the buyout. Once that's paid off, then the company is just flush with cash, which, going back to my example earlier, afforded my client the ability to make all of these acquisitions because they had all of this cash that they no longer had to pay to Uncle Sam.
Oh, interesting.
And they could use it for acquisitions.
So they did ESOP and then went to the acquisitions. Is that,
Yeah, because they couldn't find an outside buyer, so we sold it to an ESOP.
Okay.
But then we still had the whole customer diversification issue.
Yeah.
And we were able to get the seller note paid off in less than 5 years. And then after that, and even before that though, but then especially after the seller note was paid off, then he started making some significant acquisitions.
The private equity group KKR, they actually did a 60-minute episode on this about how the CEO of KKR actually did his business thesis or his research paper in his MBA on ESOPs. And he actually has done this multiple times with their portfolio companies, has done ESOP. And one of them was a garage door manufacturer in like small town Illinois. And like they actually interviewed some of their employees where they were getting life-changing money from this process. And they were people who had been there for years and they were getting like $400,000 checks and everything too. And it was this whole like celebration thing, but it's proven multiple times where they've actually grown the companies when they went ESOP. So the KKR would buy them and then turn it into ESOP and then have the value there. And so it's just interesting. You never think of private equity thinking that route, but this is what he does.
Yeah. So I'm a member of the National Center for Employee Ownership, which is a great organization that provides a lot of valuable resources, but they do a lot of studies.
Yeah.
And hands down, the studies will show that ESOP companies are more financially successful than non-ESOP companies. Yeah. And they have better employee engagement, less turnover, and especially what came out of the pandemic was that ESOP companies were able to adapt better and really come out of the pandemic stronger because they foster that employee ownership mindset. And so because we're all in it together, they didn't have just the owner trying to figure out how to handle this mess that we were in. It was a whole company of employee owners coming with different ideas and again, looking at things from different perspectives, and they're more inclined to listen to their employee owners.
Right.
And it's been really fun to see those companies because although the pandemic was difficult for everybody, those that had that strong culture, especially ESOP companies that typically have a strong culture, came not only were able to survive the pandemic, but came out of it a lot stronger.
Yeah. When you look at so for somebody that's listening and thinking, hey, I might want to explore that ESOP route, but I'm not sure if my company is the right size for that. Is there sort of a minimum size from what you've seen where, hey, here's the value cutoff where it really starts to make sense for somebody to explore, being ready for an ESOP?
Yeah, there's definitely legal or tax rules that you have to follow in terms of if you're an S corporation or a C corporation. I'll just speak in general terms. If you're an S corporation, the rule of thumb, not the law, but the rule of thumb is you want to have at least 20 employees. They say at least $500,000 of EBITDA or $1 million of EBITDA. I challenge that thinking a little bit because the company that I was referring to earlier had less than that, but they did not have any debt. And so because they did not have any debt, they were still able to cash flow the transaction.
Right.
So for me, there's certain rules, laws that we have to follow. But I would say the most important thing if you want to pursue an ESOP is if you get over the employee number and making sure that you can cash flow the transaction, making sure that as an owner that aligns with your goals of transition. Because even though it's kind of a warm and fuzzy way to transition your business and sell it to your employees, the employees actually don't buy it. The employees get to participate in the ESOP with no skin in the game. And so the company is actually cash flowing that transaction. And so you're likely not going to get the highest possible price like a private equity transaction. With that said, though, The Department of Labor and the IRS require it to be an arm's length transaction. And so it has to be run just like if it was a traditional, M&A deal.
Yeah.
And so I encourage my clients, when I'm on the ESOP side, the buy side, to hire sell-side advisors. I just closed an ESOP transaction earlier this year, and I spent years educating the owner, not even doing the valuation yet, but just educating. This is what the ESOP does. Is this what you want to do? And it took them a while to come around. And all the while I'm saying you really should retain sell-side advisors. Get a good attorney, get a good investment banking firm, valuation team on your side, because I'm on the ESOP side. I'm on the buy side.
Yeah.
And he didn't understand that initially because he thought he knew the value of the business and the buyers, the ESOP, how complicated do we need to make it? But
there's a template for that, right?
Right. But he took my advice, thankfully, and hired a great team, sell-side team, and he'll tell you that was probably one of the best things that he did for the transaction, because ESOP is very complicated. So that's one of the downfalls. It's very complicated, and even though you know the buyer, the cost to do the transaction is not that much different than hiring an investment banking firm, because we still have to go through all of that due diligence, the legal, the accounting, all of those things. So there's not a huge cost savings. And if anything else, there's more scrutiny because you got the DOL and the IRS overseeing things.
I mean, kind of when you're looking at a company that's considering a transition, and say they have like 4 key employees, but those employees don't have the financial backing, like they don't have the funds to be able to buy a company, and you're like, well, I could go private equity and I could write in the contract that these guys get to stay, but it may be better for us to do an ESOP because like that would remain them as, maybe one appoints to CEO, those sort of things. But like, is that kind of is that a scenario that you run into to where like, hey, I have key employees, they're going to be with this company for a really long time. They just don't have they don't have the deep pockets to go buy this company at all.
We do, and that's the beautiful thing about an ESOP is that it's very flexible. You can design it just about any way you want to within the context of the law. And so when we have that situation, Jake, we often will work with the selling shareholders to say, okay, who are those key people? And then we'll provide them added incentive outside of the ESOP, typically through SARs, which is stock appreciation rights, where they get added value outside of the ESOP to help if the company achieves certain financial metrics. Usually tied to the value of the company, but not always. So SARs or phantom stock you might have heard of, other types of indirect equity incentives for those key management people, because you're right, we want them to stick around, and we want to treat them and reward them for the role that they play. And we all know that especially that C-suite takes on a lot of added stress and risk and everything else to manage a large company, and they should be rewarded.
Well, and when you look at whether or not an ESOP is going to be a good fit, can it really ever work if there's not a good management team in place?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and that's one of the clarifying questions. When somebody comes to me, it's like, do you have a management team in place? If they say no, but I do have some people that I see potential in, and if those people are willing to get training and leadership development and grow in, to more leadership roles, I'll invest in them all day long. We can accomplish that.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I mean, that's another example of where having that conversation early. I mean, like you said, you spent, a couple of years talking to somebody about what their value was and what they were trying to optimize for. And, you can do a lot with that time to put yourself in a position to, have options. Because when folks come to you and it's like, hey, I've just got, this health diagnosis, or there's just, whatever significant time barriers there are around the process, how much can you take that information that you might get from, evaluation assessment, and how much can they actually do with that at that point?
Yeah, I mean, just like any other fire sale, we could find a buyer, but you're probably leaving some on the table because you didn't give yourself time to properly plan.
Well, and something we've talked about within Infinity is, the value of your company. You're going to have you can have a true appraisal done, and that's what, historical say this is what it is. But buyers may pay a lot of higher multiple based on it. And so with an ESOP, kind of going back to that, is like with them is when they look at like the value, is it truly what the appraisal says it comes out to, or can say that you can the seller say, no, like I got an offer from a private equity group that was X, and I want that for it. I mean, can that happen?
Absolutely. So that's why it's important to have sell side and buy side, because it's a negotiated sale.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. I just love telling stories. I was working with a client a couple of years ago, got a private equity offer, declined it, decided to go ESOP route. We got all but, ready to sign the papers. I mean, we'd gone through the valuation, the due diligence, the negotiation, and the private equity group came back and offered an even higher premium, and the company walked away from the ESOP and sold to private equity. And that's totally their prerogative, and I am for that, whatever they path they choose. I've also been involved in situations where a client will come to me and say, hey, I want to run a dual process. And so they'll hire an investment banking firm to take it to market. At the same time, we'll go the ESOP route. And basically what happens is the ESOP is now a competitive buyer, right? And so if they have other offers on the table, the ESOP can't ignore that. The rule is that the ESOP cannot pay more than fair market value. Well, what's fair market value? Again, value is in the eye of the beholder. And just to your point, you might have someone willing to pay a premium. Well, that establishes value. And if the ESOP wants it, how do we negotiate? So it truly is supposed to be a negotiated sale.
That's awesome. It's just so fascinating that I'll be honest, I didn't know a lot about ESOPs. I mean, I've just been enlightened by a lot by this conversation, because it's just, I'm not, and I've heard people say, oh, well, I'm going to do an ESOP, and it's like, it's much more complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. You want to make sure you've got a good group of advisors that understand ESOP.
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to your work with, business owners themselves, I mean, because you're saying again, like, this asset that they have is, makes up probably 90 to 100% of their net worth. And it's like, and maybe this is probably the only time they'll ever go through a transaction of this magnitude. So, I mean, it's going to be very emotional and identity shifting, because again, say if it's small town USA, small town Kansas, I mean, they may be a part of the fabric of that community with this business, and them making that decision to, hey, I'm ready to transition out, whether that be selling to private equity, selling to an ESOP, whatever, it's going to be very emotional. So like, how do you work through coaching business owners through that, those emotional aspects of an exit?
So part of why I formed C5 Business Advisors was to be able to help my clients through that process. And actually, I developed the 5 C's for C5 that I kind of lead my clients through. And the first is to understand if they have capacity to move forward. And so in terms of business, we might think of financial capacity or labor capacity or building capacity. But when I get to know my clients, I really challenge them and help them understand if they have the mental capacity to explore an exit option, and the emotional capacity. Because if they're too strung out, or if they have other things going on in their life, or too busy at work, they're not going to have the time that it takes to dedicate to this process.
It's a full-time job when you're going through that process.
They underestimate the amount of time and energy it takes to sell your business. So if we can get through that capacity and say, yep, we're ready, then we move on to clarity. And that's where I have discussions about what their objectives are. Is their objective to get the highest possible price? Is it to preserve jobs, leave a legacy, reward employees? Whatever the case may be, we get to understanding what the business owner's clarity is, what their objectives are. And then also that tends to spring into what their management team's vision is, right? The next generation's vision for the company is. So if we can get through assessing capacity, gaining clarity, then that gets us to the courage. And that is really testing the business owner's emotional ability to face those obstacles, whether it's just the difficult process of selling the business, whether it's the self-reflection, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Right? You have to have the courage. Just like, you know what? Okay, I think I'm ready to release control. I think I might pursue something else, or I'm going to travel more, or whatever the case may be. But helping them identify some of those obstacles and then working with them to overcome that through courage is really critical. Once we get through that, then that leads us to the consistency, which kind of goes back to the importance of documenting processes and making sure you've got the right people on board, kind of more internally focused on the business.
Yeah.
Once consistency is established, then it's just the commitment to see that plan through.
No, that's terrific.
I've definitely have had to talk some of my clients off the proverbial cliff in the 11th hour of a transaction. Am I making the right decision? And I can go back to saying, hey, remember that conversation? And this is what you said. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot. And I get it. I mean, it's emotional. Businesses are often referred to as another child for business owners, you know?
I mean, it's deeply personal.
It's deeply personal. And I don't want to rush them or influence them on the decision that they make. But I feel like my job is to help them really understand and really unpeel what their objectives are and then lead them back. Remember, you said this. Has this changed? No, you're right. Okay, we're good. We're good.
Yeah.
I always say I wish I would have gotten a minor in like psychology or like family therapy or something because that would have helped.
It sounds like you've gotten a life course in it.
I have for sure.
I mean, which is so much more useful than college.
It's not necessarily a business coach or a psychologist or therapist or whatever in this process with them because again, it's it's tasking. I mean, they built this business and now you're getting this place to where I'm not going to have this anymore, and it's like, what am I going to do on Monday morning when I wake up, or what have you? I mean, it's like it's a process that I think people think is so simple and cut and dry to buy or sell a business, but there's so much more that goes into it, you know, just and Sam, you've been through several transactions with your clients and everything, and it's deeply personal.
It is. Businesses do have a soul, and it's the owner, it's the family, it's the employees. And, for me too, if I'm able to work with these clients for, multiple years, they turn into friends. And I bear some of the burdens that they have too, because I feel hugely responsible to making sure that this transition goes smoothly because I understand how important it is to them. So it is. It's very personal.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, what's one piece of advice you'd want to give business owners, who are wanting to increase their company's value, but don't know where to start, or if they're kind of contemplating what's kind of next for me? So, was there a piece of advice you'd like to give to business owners?
There's lots, and let me tell you, I'll talk all day long. But first and foremost, and this is going to sound self-serving, and I don't mean it to be, but it's easy to say, oh, well, I want to increase the value of my business. But if they don't know what the business is worth today, how can they measure that? Yeah. And so if they can, get even if it's just a very basic calculation of value to understand what the value is today, that process will help identify those value drivers, which are the equivalent of risk factors in their business. That will give them insight as to what areas they need to improve upon, even before they're contemplating their transition. Gives them some time to focus on that, look at their business from a little bit different perspective. And through that process, I've had so many clients gain some clarity. Like, oh, well, I've been investing in this line for so long and I didn't realize it wasn't very profitable. And, or whatever the case may be. But start there. Understand what the business is worth today. Develop a plan to drive value. Things that you can start today, even apart from that, is, of course, the documenting processes and really focus on your key people. If you see potential in them, invest in their leadership development because a business it's people, it's profits, it's both. And that's why it's important to kind of look at it from a holistic view.
No, love that.
Yeah. No, that's great stuff. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your contributions here today. On this podcast, we're really passionate about partnering with our listeners to build communities that are thriving through the businesses that our listeners are growing and building and acquiring or selling. And we're really grateful for the wonderful wisdom and experience that you've brought to us today.
Well, I'm just very honored to be here and part of your lineup and just to really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you both.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Thank you for joining us. And to all of our listeners, I just want to encourage you, the work that you do matters. The people that you serve, the people that you lead, the communities that you're contributing to, all benefit from everything that you're doing, and it really does make a difference. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.